Yes, Mr. Beer.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Ms. Vennells.
Good morning, Mr. Beer.
Yesterday, aside from the 7 general topics that I dealt with in the morning, we addressed 2 issues of substance. One was the complaints made by sub-postmasters and others about bugs, errors and defects. And then secondly, we looked at remote access in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Can I turn to my third topic of substance then, which is the second site investigation and the complaint and mediation scheme?
Okay.
I'd like first to look at the process by which second site were chosen and Deloitte were not to conduct an investigation. And can we look, please, at poll 0018 0209? It'll come up on the screen for you. And if we look at the foot of the page, there's an email from Simon Baker. You're not on this chain. To Susan Crichton and Leslie Sewell of the 6th of June 2012. And he says, Susan Leslie, attached is Ron's proposal. My view is that we make it clear to Alice and Paula the distinction between the work Ron is proposing, brackets, an independent review of past cases, and the Horizon forensic audit, the Deloitte proposal, and put it on the agenda to discuss tomorrow, which would be the 7th of June. At this stage, were you aware that there were 2 contenders for the undertaking of some form of investigation, review, or audit?
From the documentation, I can see that's the case. I couldn't recall it at the time. And I think I say in my statement that the Deloitte work, which was named Project Spire, was not something that I remembered, but I can see that there were those 2 alternatives being discussed.
Can you remember the distinction between them, i.e. what was proposed to be done by a second site and what was to be done by Deloitte?
No, I can't recall the distinction, but I can see it from what was being said here. And I don't know, to be honest, how much I remember that, how much I understood that distinction at the time. Looking at the documents, they're clearly very different. The Project Spire document is a forensic investigation of the Horizon system.
And sorry to interrupt, by a forensic investigation of the Horizon system, is that captured by these words here, a forensic audit?
Yes, and I've just read that, so I've used forensic because I've just seen it on there. I would have said a detailed investigation of the Horizon system. My concern at the time, my priority at the time, was to choose an organisation whom I felt would relate best with the sub-postmasters who had been raising their claims.
As it's described here, the work that Second Sight were proposing, by contrast, was a review of past cases.
Yes.
Okay. Can we see what happened then, please? Poll 0023 3736. Now, this is a timeline that has been prepared after the event, of the events which led to and happened in the course of the mediation scheme. But it's the best and only record I think we've got of what happened on the 7th of June, the day following the email that I've just read to you.
Right.
And can we look, please, at page 3? And do you see in the box that's at the bottom of the screen there, it's recorded that on the 7th of June 2012, a meeting is held between you, Alice Perkins, Susan Crichton, Olwyn Lyons and Simon Baker, where the Deloitte and Second Sight proposals are discussed.
Yes.
And Second Sight was chosen as the preferred supplier.
Yeah.
Why was Second Sight proposal preferred to that of Deloitte?
I think because of what I just said earlier, from my own recollection, is I felt very strongly that we needed an organisation who would be able to work well with sub-postmasters. I was concerned that any one of the big four, Deloitte being one of them, may have come across too corporate and wouldn't necessarily have had the understanding of running a post office and small retail businesses. I don't recall, which is why, let me finish what I'm saying. I don't recall looking at the proposals in detail at the meeting.
That's what I was going to ask. Rather
Right.
than which might be preferred by sub-postmasters, how it might look going to one of the big four, was the substance of what each organisation was going to do a relevant consideration?
I don't recall that. I don't, and the reason I feel sure about that recollection is that when, in preparing for today, I looked at what was called the Project Spire document, I was quite surprised about the detail in it. And one of my reflections now is that actually that would have been a very good piece of work to have done, because it may have brought more data to the fore than we knew.
That's a question that I'm going to turn to in a moment. And it is the short point that the second site review was much narrower in scope, in that it was proposed that the system should be reviewed by looking at a sample of past cases.
Yes, I believe that's the case.
Rather than auditing the Horizon system as a whole.
Absolutely the case in terms of my view today. I don't believe we went through that particular angle of discussion in the meeting.
Is that right? What would you say to the suggestion that a deliberate choice was made to pick a proposal that was much narrower in scope, that only looked at a sample of past cases, rather than auditing the Horizon system as a whole?
Oh, well, from a personal point of view, I would say that was absolutely not the case. I have no recollection of that at all.
You agree, I think, cutting to the chase, that it would have been preferable, looking back now, had Deloitte been chosen, because their proposal may or even would have brought to the surface, if carried through to its conclusion, many of the issues that were subsequently discovered.
I think the operative word is may. Mm-hmm. I have reflected on that. Whether Deloitte would in fact have surfaced some of the other important areas that Second Sight did, I don't know, because I think one of the other outcomes of this has been the right decision was looking at the contract, and that may not have surfaced through the Deloitte work, which was particularly focused on the system itself.
Can we look, please, at the terms of reference, or at least an early copy of the terms of reference that were settled for Second Sight, poll 309-6576. And if we just blow that up, please, you'll see that this is a Second Sight document, and it is, quote, a proposal to carry out an independent review of past fraud and theft cases in order to determine whether the facts support the business's findings and the charges brought against individuals. And then if we go to the detail on page 5, please. Can you see that the proposal is for a case review, and the case review will include the following tasks, said Second Sight: selecting a representative sample of cases that have led to prosecutions, court-appointed restitution. The sample needs to cover cases where defendants claim they didn't take any cash, where assertions have been made that the system, i.e. Horizon, caused the shortage, including old and new versions of Horizon if possible, and which have been taken up by MPs. And then if you look at the second to last bullet point, study and selectively test the Horizon system in order to find any black hole, program bug, etc., that might have caused mysterious shortages. What's described there, selecting a representative sample of cases that led to prosecutions or court-appointed restitutions, and then study and selectively test the Horizon system in order to find bugs, for shorthand, that may have caused mysterious shortages, was exactly what was needed, wasn't it?
Yes.
It didn't happen, though, did it?
The work that the Post Office and Second Sight did over this quite long period of time didn't come to a final conclusion. No.
Well, it didn't, and we're not talking about the mediation scheme yet, because
Right.
that was a second piece of work, essentially. We're talking about the events that led to the interim
Right.
report in July 2013. That's what this proposal is about. A representative sample of cases that led to prosecutions was not selected, was it?
I don't recall the cases that were selected. Looking at this today, I don't recall the narrow focus on prosecution and court-appointed restitution. My recollection is that we were looking at a broad sample of cases, of which some were cases with criminal convictions. I thought it was broader than that. I don't recall it as being that narrow.
Well, we'll see how things got changed by the Post Office.
Right, okay.
In the events which happened, i.e. over time. Would you agree that if what is described here in those 2 bullet points that I have identified had in fact been undertaken, again, there is, to use the may word, a possibility that the decade that followed until faults in Horizon and the miscarriages of justice identified by the Court of Appeal may have been discovered earlier?
I think that is a possibility. I saw in the inquiry documentation that there is a piece of advice that Susan Crichton sought from Richard Morgan QC, where he said that he thought that the advice was that the Post Office really shouldn't get into this at all because it would be a no-win situation.
It would open the floodgates.
It would open the flood. Well, I think he made 2 conclusions from memory. That was one, and I can't remember what the other one was. But my reflection as I read this recently was that, first of all, I didn't know that she had taken that advice, and it came up later, a year later, when she and I had a conversation about her wanting to leave the business, and I suspect we may come on to that. But when I look at that advice now, I think it is a great pity that we didn't know about that, because we may have approached this differently.
And can you explain why? I.e., had you, and I think you mean the executive and the board,
Yes.
known about Richard Morgan's advice, you may have approached things differently. In what way?
In that we may well have focused completely separate, understanding the advice he gave, that we may have focused very differently on what we called in shorthand the criminal cases, because they needed to be reviewed differently to others that were not criminal cases. And what we ended up with was a scheme that tried to respond to a variety of different cases and themes.
Let's look at what the Post Office did in relation, in particular, to criminal cases. That document can come down, please. And turn to a couple of days after the meeting of the 7th of June to the 9th of June, poll 309-6606. If you forgive me one moment. If we look at the foot of the page, please. There is an email from Alice Perkins of the 9th of June, 9:36, to you. And she says, following a conversation with Olwyn yesterday, given I'm away for a few days, I thought I should let you know before I went where I stand on which cases should be in or out of this review. I've given this more thought since yesterday. I am clear that we should include all, in capital letters, the MP's cases, irrespective of whether they have been decided in court. If we try to draw a distinction here, we will be accused of picking cases to suit ourselves and being vulnerable on the ones we omit. We'll have a row about that instead of moving the issue on. On reflection, I don't buy the argument that we would somehow undermine the court process by doing this. There are plenty of ways in which people can go over ground which has been settled in court, and if there weren't, no one would ever be able to get a conviction overturned. And if, which we don't believe, there were new evidence in a case which had been decided, we would want to do and be seen to do the right thing by that. And then if we scroll up the page, we see you replying in the bottom part of the page, which I think is about admin, essentially. And then...
I think it says I wasn't part of the discussion, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
And then if we go a little bit further up, Olwyn replies to you, and I think to you alone, Paula, in case Susan doesn't pick this up as she's in Berlin and before you speak to Alice, the issue that came to light with the list of MP cases was that they included the Mishra, I think that's Seema Misra. You will remember the case and the publicity. She went to prison and had her baby whilst in there. The husband got publicity through radio and press. Susan's anxiety, and she raised this at the meeting with Alice before you joined, was whether now contacting her to tell her we review the case would be a red rag to a bull. Alice feels this is the business pushing back unnecessarily, and she feels this happened throughout the process, and she is having to keep pushing us. Susan's getting external advice on the effect that this would have on cases which have been brought through the courts. There's quite a lot in there. Did you agree with Alice Perkins that all cases should be included in the independent review, even if they involved criminal convictions?
Yes, I wasn't making any distinction.
Did you agree with Alice Perkins that the business was pushing back unnecessarily against that?
I don't think I knew that, and I think this was so. The bit of admin that we skipped over is I say that I'll call Alice, which I did, and I think she explained to me the conversation that she had had. And from what I've seen in documentation, clearly there was an awful lot of consideration going on about what should and shouldn't happen, which I was not in the loop on.
Who would be the business that was pushing back unnecessarily against the chair?
Well, the only thing that I can think is relating back to this piece of advice that Susan sought from Richard Morgan, which was very clear advice to her, and one assumes that she discussed it in a meeting, and one assumes that that must have alerted her to maybe needing to take a different approaches with cases like Mrs. Misra's, for instance, but I wasn't involved in those conversations. And there is I'm not sure, there is a further pushback, I can't remember if it's before this or after, where the terms of reference which are prepared by, again, I think Susan, refer to defence documents, and Alice comes back and says, no, it should be all of the documentation.
So the business here, you take pushing back unnecessarily, you take to mean shorthand for Susan Crichton?
For the legal team, yes. I think it was Susan Crichton and Hugh Flemington who were at the meeting.
It says that this has happened, or it's Alice's view that this has happened throughout the process. Was that a view that you were aware of, that the business was pushing back unnecessarily against a review throughout the process?
Not until I spoke to Alice, which I did, I think, on the Saturday morning. I was concerned, and so if a chairman raises issues like this, I wanted to know what had arisen.
Did you think that Mrs. Misra's case should be included in an independent review?
I wasn't even involved in the conversation about that. My view was that all the cases that had come forward through Lord Arbuthnot and thereafter from other MPs, we were going to review all of the cases.
Did you share Miss Crichton's concerns recorded here that even contacting Miss Misra would be a red rag to a bull?
No.
Did you know that Post Office was getting external advice on the effect that bringing such cases within the review would have?
Well, clearly I did, in the sense that Alwyn mentions it in the final line on this email. I don't at that stage think I would have asked more about it, because the situation was resolved in that all of the cases were going to come in. If Susan was seeking advice on something of a legal nature, I would expect her to do that, and then I would listen to whatever that advice was.
Do you know what external advice the Post Office did take regarding the effect of including cases like Seema Misra's in the independent review?
I don't think so. I certainly didn't see the Richard Morgan advice.
I don't think there was a written advice. There was a meeting with him.
There was a meeting note, right, yeah. I don't think I did, no.
Have you got a date readily to hand to remind me of when that was, Mr. Payne?
Given a moment, I
No.
probably could.
I'm sure we'll find it between us. Don't take yourself out of your stride.
Thank you. Did you know the substance of the advice, the external advice that was given?
No, not until I read it in preparation for the inquiry.
Did you and therefore the board take not take the advice given, as you now know, by Richard Morgan KC into account in deciding the scope of Second Sight's review?
No, I don't believe, you would have to ask Alice Perkins, but I don't believe that Alice Perkins or the board knew of that advice. But Susan had a conversation with Alice that I was not involved in, so it's possible it was shared in that meeting, but my understanding is not.
Thank you. Can we move on into 2013, please? And look at poll 0010-0200. This is a minute, I think, from, as we can see, David Oliver to you, copied to others, of the 5th of February 2013. Could you explain who David Oliver was, please? David
Oliver, I believe, was on a short-term contract, maybe a year or two. He was either a consultant with PA Consulting or had left them and came to the Post Office and was working on the Project Sparrow work. In fact, looking at the list, what date is this, please?
5th of February 2013.
2013. No, he was working on the Sparrow project.
He sends this minute to you and others regarding essentially options that the Post Office could take to deliver the scheme in a timely fashion. You can see that there.
Yes.
Under summary. we identified 3 broad courses of action that might be taken to improve the ability of Post Office successfully to deliver the mediation scheme in a timely fashion. Can we look at page 2, please? And scroll down to what was the third option, Plan C, a contingency plan to replace Second Sight if they refuse to work on the scheme under terms which the Post Office find acceptable. Engagement of a professional accountancy firm such as Grant Thornton to replace Second Sight entirely. It's possible that Second Sight will refuse to work under the proposed terms of engagement from the Post Office, and that they may attempt to insist terms that neither you or the Post or the board can accept. In this scenario, they may either walk away from the scheme or Post Office may have to end their engagement. Was it the case that despite their appointment in mid-2012, no terms of reference or terms of engagement had been settled by February 2013 for Second Sight?
I don't know about terms of engagement. I do know that terms of reference were drawn up. Engagement, I don't know. That wouldn't have been something that I would have been involved in.
By this time, was it anticipated that Second Sight would refuse to work under the terms of engagement that the Post Office required?
It seems to say so here. I don't recall being aware of that, presumably until this was presented to me, and I'm not entirely sure what that refers to.
Do you know which of these options was chosen? Do you want to look back at options
yes,
A and B,
yeah.
please? On page 1, please. A was clarification of Second Sight's engagement.
Yes. I think A and B, actually. So my recollection at this stage is that there were concerns from the team that very few cases had been reviewed. The time was being extended and therefore the cost extended. And I think that was the main concern, is that the work, for whatever reason, wasn't being completed. And I was given a number of options. I'm sorry, I don't remember the discussion, but my sense is that it was, we want a Second Sight to see this work through. It would have been difficult to stand somebody else up, I think. And anyway, they had the commitment of Lord Arbuthnot and the MPs. But I do think we brought in or changed the way they worked in some way to help them. But I may be confusing that with the mediation scheme, because this issue of time and cost overrun was a fairly frequent topic of conversation.
Can we move forwards to later in 2013, still before their interim report was produced, by looking at poll 309-8437. And looking at page 2, please. And if we just look at the foot of page 1, we'll see an email from Mr. Bates to you of the 21st of May 2013. And he says, "Hello, Paula. It's been a while since we met at James Arbuthnot's office, but at that time you did say that if I had any concerns, I should contact you directly, hence the reason for this email. Would it be possible for Kay Linnell and I to meet you? You recall that Kay is an independent forensic accountant who, on behalf of Jfsa, has been monitoring the work Second Sight has been undertaking. The main purpose of the meeting is to ensure that you have been receiving the full details of what has been occurring with the Second Sight investigation. Bearing in mind what has been discovered so far, I, for one, am surprised that we haven't yet met to discuss the implications. Whilst I appreciate the majority of the issues began under previous regimes, and you've expressed a genuine willingness to address the concerns that Jfsa has been raising, these issues are still continuing. I've little doubt it's now feasible to show that many of the prosecutions that the post office has pressed home should never have taken place. I believe this is a view shared by Kay. At this point in time, did you understand why Mr. Bates was saying that it was feasible that many prosecutions that the post office had undertaken should never have taken place?
I don't believe I did, because we were still waiting. The work was still very much a work in progress.
Had any of the in progress work been fed back to you, i.e. provisional views, what it was showing, early themes, emerging issues?
Not that I can recall with any clarity, because I remember being surprised about, I think slightly, what is the date of this, please?
21st of May.
Of May. Maybe not too long after this, but as we were approaching the production of the interim report, I remember being surprised about some of the conclusions that were being reached, because the criticisms from Post Office were that their work hadn't been taken into account. So I think at this stage, possibly not, other than feedback that the work was going too slowly and Post Office's input either hadn't taken place or Second Sight, there were concerns being raised perhaps that Second Sight were not taking account of it.
Would you have been very concerned reading an email like this, that the person representing a key stakeholder, Jfsa, was saying that the prosecutions, and many of them, that the Post Office had brought ought never to have taken place?
I was concerned to get the email from Alan, certainly. The point he's making about the prosecutions was the point that the JFSA had made for, I now know, for a number of years, but that wasn't new news to me at this stage.
Is that how you would have thought of it, that this is just Mr. Bates saying something that he's always said?
No, not at all. I think that I went back to my team and said, because I had said to Mr. Bates that, you know, if he needed to, he should get in touch. So I don't know if there's documentation on this, but I'm pretty sure that I went back to the team and said, what should we do about this? You know, I've offered to meet Mr. Bates. What is your view?
Had you been given any inkling that anything had emerged that might undermine the safety of convictions?
No.
If we go to page 1, please, we'll see your reply. And if we scroll up, you say, I am, second paragraph, happy to meet, but can't make the suggested date. And then the third paragraph, my understanding is we're too early in the investigation to suggest that things have been discovered which call into question the integrity of the system or the validity of the prosecutions, and to suggest that at this stage would be wrong. In order to say that, you must have been told, would this be right, the stage at which the investigation had reached, and whether it was possible to say that the integrity of the system or the validity of prosecutions had, even at that stage, been called into question?
Yes.
And who were you getting that feedback from?
At this stage, I would have talked to whoever was leading the work on this. So Susan Crichton, Alwyn Lyons, I can't remember who else, Simon Baker, presumably David Oliver, whose name we've seen.
And so were you then getting feedback on the state of the investigation by Second Sight in order to be able to say, essentially, Mr. Bates, you're jumping the gun?
I'm almost certain that when I got Alan's note, that I went to the team and said, I've had this note, what's the current status? And as I say here, I would like to meet with Mr. Bates. So I suspect that's where I got that information from.
You say in the last paragraph, I've been advised that Second Sight have now agreed that the focus over the next few weeks will be on 3 specific cases. And the meeting might be a more productive one when that work has been completed. Do you know how it came about that what started as a debate between the choice of Deloitte conducting a full forensic audit of Horizon, Second Sight conducting a review of past cases that would be a representative sample, but include some testing of the integrity of the Horizon system, ended up with focusing on 3 cases?
My recollection is that the team, what I can recall is frustration from the team that the work Second Sight was doing had moved away from focusing on individual cases to development of themes. And what they were trying to do at this stage, and Second Sight as well, to be fair, was to try and corral this back into a piece of work which could have a report which could be fed back to the MPs before we got to recess in just a small number of weeks after this. That's my recollection, and that was to misuse a word in this context, but that was the theme that ran through, which was Second Sight were focusing on themes rather than on individual cases. And at some stage, we will come on to how that then developed into spot reviews, which I think came after this.
And so was it the Post Office, in your view, or Second Sight that narrowed focus down to a very small number of cases?
My view is it was both, because both Second Sight and the Post Office had a commitment to Lord Arbuthnot and the MPs to get some work out for people to look at, and we were now not quite a year, but sort of 10 months into this. That's my recollection.
Were you aware of a view amongst the lawyers, and in particular Susan Crichton, that if we review a large number of cases, that might open the floodgates to damages claims by sub-postmasters?
No.
And that a less risky approach would be to just pick the cases in which the MPs happen to be interested in?
No, I don't remember that at all.
Can we go to the, this is slightly out of order, but it's in order to answer the chairman's question from earlier, the Richard Morgan Casey advice. It's poll 406484. And the date says the 12th of June, 2012. I think this is the advice. We'll see in a moment that it's recorded as a note of an in-person conference of which you weren't aware.
That's right, yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, the board was not aware.
No, I don't believe so. The only person who could possibly be aware might have been Alice Perkins in that conversation Susan had had. But actually, looking at the date of this, I think this comes afterwards, doesn't it?
Yes, if we look at the second bullet point, the proposal to instruct an independent expert to prepare a report on the system is the highest risk response to the issue. Was that view communicated to you?
No.
In fact, a decision had been made, it seems already, at the meeting of the 7th of June 2012, not to instruct an expert to prepare a report, a forensic audit of the Horizon system, hadn't it?
The decision had been made to go, in my head, to go with Second Sight for the right reasons.
The note records what will it achieve, and I'm not going to attribute any of these words to anyone, because when he gave evidence, Mr. Morgan took the point that it's not clear that it's him speaking
Right.
Here, and it doesn't necessarily represent his advice. It could be anyone speaking. What will it achieve? it will not be able to address any of the civil or criminal cases dealt with under old Horizon. Was that advice communicated back to you, that an independent report couldn't look at civil or criminal cases dealt with under old Horizon?
No.
Will it seek to review particular cases? If so, which ones? And then what might be said to be the important paragraph is the third one. Whatever the findings of the expert report, it will not resolve the problem. The Post Office will be damned if they do and damned if they don't. If the findings are that there are no issues with Horizon, people will see that as a whitewash. And then this, whereas if the findings are negative, that will open the floodgates to damages claims by sub-postmasters who were imprisoned for false accounting. And Access Legal, that's part of Shoesmiths, will start to pursue the civil cases they're currently sitting on. Was that view communicated back to you as relevant to decision making if we commission an independent report which comes back with negative conclusions, people who have been imprisoned might bring claims against us?
No, absolutely not.
And that would be a reason not to commission an independent report, because it might find out things that entitle people to question their convictions or bring damages claims against us.
No, I didn't know about this.
Did that ever form part of your decision making? We best not ask for the Deloitte report, because if it discovers too much, we may face damages claims.
No.
To your knowledge, did that ever form part of any discussion or decision making at board level?
No. And as I say, in the meeting where we took the decision to go with Second Sight, I don't remember looking at two separate sets of documents and comparing and contrasting.
And the foot of the screen that's being displayed, a less risky approach is to agree to take the relevant MPs privately through particular cases in which they are interested. Was that ever communicated back to you?
No.
Thank you. Can we return to where we were in the chronology, which is the following year, June 2023, by looking at poll 309 8789. And if we scroll down and look at the text, the message from Olwyn Lyons, it's dated the 28th of June 2013. We're getting quite close here to the date of the production of the Second Sight interim report, aren't we?
Yes.
Which we know was published on the 8th of July 2013. Yeah. It's quite difficult because the way the text has been printed on this email. But if you look at the fourth bullet point, Miss Lyons says to you that she is going to spend time with Janet. Is that Janet Walker?
Yes.
And remind us who Janet Walker was.
Janet Walker was the executive assistant for Lord Arbuthnot.
She says she can give me as long as it takes. My approach will be to try to get to understand the status of the review and the risk to Lord Arbuthnot and us of an incomplete interim report. I'll share the fact that Second Sight are not using all the evidence they've been given, and our concern is that their approach to try and keep everyone happy is not how we would expect a forensic accountant to behave. I do think this is the right place to share the bugs we found and how we have dealt with them, which is why the report from Rod/Leslie, checked by Legal and Mark, is important. My objective is to get Janet to a place where she also wants the meeting to be cancelled. And then if we scroll up, please, we'll see your reply. Sending on to Alice Perkins. The second paragraph, you'll see below Alice's Olwyn's proposed next steps covers all the ground. Olwyn and I, third paragraph, are staying close, and I'm expecting an update later this afternoon. No need to bother you today. On what basis did you understand the Post Office had determined that Second Sight were not using all of the evidence that the Post Office had given them?
From conversations with the team involved in the work.
Second Sight were getting it wrong. They were
No, I don't
not
think...
looking
I
at the
beg your
evidence.
pardon. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you. No, I don't think that is what I was told. What I was told is that they hadn't, because this had run on too long, they hadn't yet had time to take account of the Post Office's view in the investigations they were doing. That's my recollection of what I was told, not because they were getting it wrong.
But was there any...
Sorry, I beg your pardon. They may have been getting it wrong because they hadn't yet taken account of the input from the Post Office.
Was there a suggestion in what you were told that Second Sight were biased in their approach?
No, certainly not at this stage. My very clear recollection is this was simply, to describe it more colloquially, the team felt it was unfair because Post Office hadn't had the opportunity to contribute yet. Whether that was true or not, I didn't check that with Second Sight, but what I was told is that the work was so far behind that Second Sight had yet to take account of the Post Office's input.
Was the sense of unfairness conveyed to you?
Frustration, I think.
By who?
Olwyn certainly was one of the main people I spoke to, Susan, and I think David Oliver, but I'm only remembered by having seen his name today.
What evidence were you told that the Post Office had provided to Second Sight that they were not using or taking account of?
I can't remember today, I'm sorry. They were looking at a number of they were looking at a number of cases, is my understanding, and these cases raised different issues. So it would have been whatever data the Post Office needed to present about the issue that was being investigated.
Were you told that Second Sight were trying to, in the words of the email, keep everyone happy?
I was told that, and I knew, I think, because we had agreed to fund K-L to support the JFSA, I was told that they, I think, if I remember the timing correctly, that they had been asked by Lord Arbuthnot to keep the JFSA happy. And I don't think we had any problem with that until the team began to raise these questions that perhaps because of that Second Sight we're not looking at the Post Office work. But I'm probably now speculating too much, to be fair.
Did you tell Second Sight that they were being unfair on the Post Office by not taking account of the evidence that the Post Office was giving to them?
I didn't have regular conversations with Second Sight. I was running the organisation. I wasn't closely involved in the detail of this work. I'm not sure if I spoke to him at this time, but I would have had no problem sharing that piece of information.
Did you tell Second Sight about the Post Office's concerns about its approach, or alleged approach, of keeping the JFSA happy?
I don't believe I spoke to Second Sight.
Did anyone, to your knowledge, say, you're not treating us fairly, you're trying to keep the sub-postmasters happy, and you're not looking at our evidence?
I would hope that the Post Office team... Sorry, first of all, I don't think the Post Office team would have said you're trying to keep the sub-postmasters happy. I may be wrong on that, because that feels too strong a view in one direction. This whole point was to look at the sub-postmasters' cases. But I think the team would undoubtedly have said to Second Sight, there is more information here to be taken account of.
Can we look a little more deeply at the move to select a small number of cases by looking at poll 0014-4687? This is the previous month. If we look at page 2, please. And scroll down. An email between Simon Baker and Second Sight, with Alwyn Lyons copied in. Not you at this stage, but it's about a meeting. I think this is the meeting that we've just seen Post Office was going to try and get cancelled.
Right.
Ron, just to ensure that we're on the same page, Paula would like to say we've agreed the following with Second Sight. Can you confirm you agree? The investigation reports on 2 to 3 EMPs cases by summer assess or more. By using the 2 to 3 cases, you'll answer the question, have systemic defects in the Horizon system resulted in the wrongful conviction or suspension of sub-postmasters? By this stage, had the proposal that we saw at the first thing this morning to examine a representative sample of cases been abandoned?
Not on my understanding.
How did it come about that by late May, the Post Office was proposing that by looking at 2 to 3 cases, Second Sight could answer the very big question, have systemic defects in the Horizon resulted in the wrongful conviction or suspension of sub-postmasters?
I'm not sure, but when the report was produced, as the inquiry knows, one of the conclusions was that so far no systemic defects had been found. So whether as a result of the broader work, so Second Sight had been working...
Sorry, can you repeat that answer, please?
Yes. When the Second Sight interim report was published, one of its initial conclusions was that so far no systemic issues had been found with the Horizon system.
And just stopping there,
Yeah.
that's 2 months after this.
Yes, but I'm getting to
I'm-
answer your question,
yes.
if I may, because to have reached that conclusion, which in a sense is what point 4 here refers to, referring back to point 2, you couldn't reach that conclusion on 2 to 3 cases. So how could you do it on 2 to 3 cases? Because of the other work they had done. They were working through different themes, as I understood it, so potentially through that work. Second Sight had been working on this for 10 months now. They hadn't just done they hadn't even done 2 to 3 cases in that period of time.
Why was the proposal to limit the report to determining whether systemic defects in Horizon had resulted in wrongful convictions on the basis of 2 or 3 cases?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in the conversation. I believe from other documentation I've seen that the recommendation was to choose 2 of the 3, I don't think this is the word, but hardest cases. So not cases that would have presented the Post Office in the best light, but cases which could have been used to challenge the Horizon system and then do that work through. There is some documentation on this somewhere else.
How could 2 or 3 cases possibly answer the question, have systemic defects in Horizon generally resulted in the wrongful conviction?
They couldn't. They could not possibly do that. And I wasn't involved in this conversation, but by this stage, there was an urgency to have a report produced that showed that some work was at least in progress. And
You say you weren't involved in this conversation. This email says you want to say this. Paula would like to say the following.
yes.
Did you want to say that by looking at 2 or 3 cases, we can answer the entire question of whether systemic defects had resulted in the wrongful conviction of sub-postmasters?
I was absolutely not, to be completely clear, trying to drive a conclusion from Second Sight that they would not have given.
It's an answer to a different question.
No, I realise that, but I don't recall the background. So I didn't write this email. I wasn't copied in this email. I don't recall a conversation where I consciously said it would be possible, because it wouldn't be possible, to come to a conclusion on systemic defects as a result of 2 to 3 cases.
Isn't that exactly what happened, Ms Vennells? That the Second Sight report addressed a very small number of cases. It contained the sentence about no systemic defects, and then forever after, the Post Office paraded that conclusion.
It did come to that conclusion in its interim report. There is no way the Post Office... First of all, there is no way that I would have wanted to persuade Second Sight on something that they were not prepared to say, and I don't believe Second Sight would ever have agreed to that. If they came to that conclusion in their interim report, that was their conclusion.
Isn't that what the Post Office wanted to drive them to? And isn't this the evidence of such driving?
The Post Office most certainly wanted the reassurance that the Horizon system could be relied upon. That has been the objective all the way through this. At no stage did I get the sense that anybody in the Post Office was going to be able to influence Second Sight over what conclusions they came to. I would be very surprised if that was the case here.
Did you receive, or the board receive, any advice as to the appropriate scope of an investigation by Second Sight, as to the nature and extent of any investigation that would be required in order to determine whether there were systemic defects in Horizon?
The only information I and the board had was contained in the terms of reference of the work that Second Sight were doing, which is what we looked at earlier.
I.e., we, the Post Office, need to engage somebody to produce a report whose conclusions are respectable and truly provide us with the answer as to whether or not there are systemic defects in Horizon.
Yes.
You think that's the report they produced?
Second Sight didn't produce the report that Project Spire under Deloitte could have produced. Second Sight responded to the terms of reference which were agreed with them. This work was approached from the point of view of trying to resolve postmaster cases. That was the genesis of it. That was the initial conversation with Lord Arbuthnot and Alice Perkins.
Can we move forwards, please?
Before we do, Mr. Beer,
Yes.
can I just be clear about what you are saying about this email, Ms. Vennells? As I read it, it is a request by Mr. Baker to Mr. Warmington that 4 matters are agreed, and it reads as if he is making that request on your behalf. All right? That's how it reads.
It does read that way.
So what is your evidence to me about whether Mr. Baker was accurately representing what you had told him in this email?
Firstly, Sue, and I don't recall the conversation with Simon Baker
Right?
at all. I rarely met with Simon. And if I did, it was usually with Susan or Alwyn. But it sounds as though at some stage a conversation was had, and I may have accepted that you could This email could have been produced one of two ways, couldn't it? Or multiple ways. I could have said, this is what I want, or he could have said to me, this is where we're at. We think that actually we will get 2 to 3 MP cases done, and I may well have said, will that help us answer the question about are there systemic defects in the Horizon system? I wouldn't have known personally from any of the, because I wasn't involved in the work or conversations at Second Sight, point 4 about whether they could have said no or not at this stage. So I can only assume that has come from a conversation with Simon Baker and or somebody else.
All right.
Thank you. Can we move forward a couple of days to poll 309-8317? This is a briefing for you for the meeting that was proposed to be held between you and James Arbuthnot on the 23rd of May. Can you see that?
Yes, yes.
And it says, under key messages, we're concerned that the investigation's overrunning, the findings will not be definitive, and there'll be no satisfactory outcome to the Horizon question for MPs or the Post Office. We would like to discuss ways to more clearly define the scope so we get a definitive outcome within reasonable timescales. And then under the heading background, 2.1, when the Post Office commissioned Second Sight, the expectation was that the investigation would review a small number of MP cases, 6 to 12 cases. Firstly, does that represent your recollection of the Post Office's expectation when Second Sight were being instructed?
I don't remember today, but we were talking to Lord Arbuthnot and I think 2 or 3 other MPs, so that's entirely possible.
Do you know why it was the Post Office's expectation that a smallish number of cases, 6 to 12, would be the limit of Second Sight's review?
Presumably because that was the number that was being discussed at the time.
Discussed by who?
With James Arbuthnot and the team working on it. I don't recollect 6 to 12 cases as a particular number, because what I remember is that the number increased as more MPs raised cases.
You remember the Second Sight proposal that we looked at? Its suggested scope of work
Yes.
was to review a representative sample of cases in order to answer the question of whether there had been wrongful convictions.
Yes.
Was that the Post Office's understanding when it was commissioning Second Sight that that's the work that it would be undertaking?
If that is what was in the final terms of reference, yes.
The speaking note or briefing carries on. MPs have now submitted 29 cases and Jfsa have submitted about 20 cases. It's unlikely that the investigation, no matter how long it runs, will conclude anything definitive. As the remit has become blurred, different stakeholders have different expectations and the evidence is open to interpretation. Was that a view that you held at the time?
I didn't have a view on the work because I wasn't closely associated with it. So I would take the view that I was given by the experts who were doing the work at the time.
So you would subscribe to or be willing to repeat that view expressed in 2.3?
Not necessarily. I mean, if I was given information, I would usually ask questions about it. I don't know what I did with this brief at the time.
The suggestion that any investigation would conclude anything definitive, was that your understanding?
No, I don't think that was my understanding at any time throughout this, and the inquiry will see there is further documentation where I'm exhorting the Post Office and Second Sight to move through the cases because I wanted the cases looked at. There was at this time actually, as a potential helpful issue, a number of cases had come through, I think, from MPs, and there was some debate about whether there was sufficient information and quality of information to be able to do any work on them at all. And that was Second Sight's view. They went back to some of those cases, and in some cases they couldn't produce information. So whether that was part of this point, I don't know.
Did the Post Office subsequently present Second Sight's interim report as a definitive view that there were no systemic errors or failures in Horizon?
The Post Office presented it sometimes definitively and sometimes less so, yes.
Do you know how that came about, given what is recognised by this note at this stage?
No, I think what happened is that when the interim report was published and it said it was an interim report and so far it had found no systemic issues with Horizon, that was reported sometimes in communications saying so far they had found none. Mm-hmm. And there is documentation where I'm asked about, or maybe I offered the view that actually the qualification was so far. And there are other communications which may simply be inconsistency of communication, I don't know, which simply says they had found nothing systemic.
Under the heading, just above the heading, Proposal 2.6, the investigation's been running for a year, and to date, no evidence of systemic failures has been found. Proposal, James Arbuthnot to request Second Sight to complete the investigations on 2 to 3 MPs' cases, selecting the ones they feel best indicate systemic problems.
That was the point I was trying to make earlier, thank you.
How would an individual case indicate systemic problems?
I don't know that I can answer that question. It couldn't, could it?
Bit tricky, isn't it?
It's very tricky, yes.
This was a briefing to you of what you should say and seek to achieve in a meeting with James Arbuthnot. Yes?
Yes.
Had you signed up to this idea by this time, at least then, that James Arbuthnot should be asked to persuade Second Sight to wind their investigation up on 2 to 3 cases, and those 2 to 3 cases would answer the question, have systemic defects resulted in the wrongful conviction of sub-postmasters?
Could you ask the question again?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Had by this stage,
yes,
in readiness for the meeting with James Arbuthnot on the 23rd of May 2013, you signed up to the idea that he would be asked to persuade Second Sight or request Second Sight to wind their investigation up on the basis of 2 to 3 MP cases answering the question, have systemic defects in Horizon resulted in the wrongful conviction of sub-postmasters?
I don't believe so, because we had committed to a larger number of cases. There were significantly more cases now in, I was going to say the scheme, but we're not yet into the scheme, but now in the project. This was an interim report, and I don't think there is any evidence that I thought that was the case. My understanding was that we had made a commitment to the MPs, and all the way through this, I wanted all of the cases looked at.
We've seen now an email that attributes to you a suggestion that you wanted to agree this with James Arbuthnot, and a speaking note or a briefing note saying the same thing?
It doesn't say that I'm trying to wind the scheme up, which I think was your question.
Okay, they should focus on answering the question, have systemic defects in Horizon resulted in the wrongful conviction of sub-postmasters by reference to 2 to 3 cases?
Yeah, so
Was that your view as to what should happen?
no, at no stage did I make the link that you have just led me to make between these 2 to 3 cases and being able to reach a view on the system and being able to complete the whole piece of work. What I was very aware of is that this was an interim review coming up, and that there were more cases to go through the scheme.
The link is made right here in this document, isn't it? In paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2.
It is, and as I mentioned earlier, before the document came up, my understanding was that from the work Second Sight had done, presumably around the thematic work where they had been looking at a number of cases, and they're now being asked to take 2 or 3 cases which may or may not show whether sub-postmasters had been wrongfully convicted.
Can we move forward?
I was not trying to close anything down. It's really important that I say that.
Can we move forwards, please, to closer to the production of the interim report? Poll 3099003. An email from Martin Edwards. Can you explain who Mr. Edwards was at this time, July 13?
Martin Edwards was my chief of staff.
He emails you on the 4th of July with a draft for the board. He says, hopefully it's not too long, but it's difficult not to open some of these issues without providing a reasonably full explanation. And so what follows is this, right, a draft email that you were to send to your board.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then beneath the dotted line, we see the draft email. I wanted to send you a brief email to update you on where we are with the Second Sight investigation. We've been engaging closely with Second Sight throughout the week to understand the position they intend to take in the interim report and emphasising our concern that their findings must be even-handed and grounded in the facts. In line with our discussion on Monday's board call, we understand they've not found any evidence yet of systemic issues with the Horizon system, and it should be noted that this is based on a detailed review of their 4 best cases in terms of compelling evidence. So by this time, I think you had drawn a link between a review of a small number of cases, it's got up to 4, and whether there were systemic issues with Horizon.
Yes, but I hadn't drawn that link. That, I think the way I read this is that is what the team had understood from Second Sight.
What Second Sight were prepared to say that there were no systemic issues with Horizon generally on the basis of looking at 4 cases.
That appears to be the case, but as I've said, they also were doing wider work by this stage.
What was your understanding at this point at what systemic issues meant?
I'm not sure, as I say in my statement, that I was able to make an informed decision on that. Second Sight themselves, I think, refer to it as something that might have a broad impact across the post offices or across the system. I can't remember, but you will have the reference.
Was there a shared...
And so my assumption, if they felt they could reach this conclusion from a small number of cases, was that perhaps, but this is my reflection today, I don't think I had the reflection at the time, was that perhaps they had seen something in those cases that could have occurred elsewhere. But I'm speculating to try and help answer the question that I didn't ask at the time.
Was there a shared understanding between you and the Post Office Board as to what systemic issues meant?
I don't think the conversation ever happened.
Was there a shared understanding between you and the Post Office team that were leading on the work with Second Sight
No.
as
No.
to what systemic issues meant?
No.
Was there any discussion over what systemic issues meant?
I don't recall one, no.
Thank you. So it's 11 o'clock. May we take the morning break until 15:15?
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms Vennells, can we turn, please, to some documents that may provide some insight into your approach and decision-making in relation to the Post Office's decision not to review all past convictions in the light of what was emerging from Second Sight. Can we look, please, at poll 309-9056? And if we look at the bottom of page 1, please. And if we just look at the top of the page, I think we'll see who this is sent to. Leslie Sewell, Martin Edwards, Mark Davis, Alwyn Lyons, Susan Crichton. Mm-hmm. Go back to the bottom of page 1, please. Thanks for your inputs today. Susan, I need your thoughts on the note below, especially 1 and 2, please, and the questions at the end of the mail. I think we have the following, which is a variant. 1, a working party over the next 3 to 4 months. This comprises the Post Office working collaboratively with the Jfsa and does 3 things. So just stopping where we are at the moment. I think you knew, is this right, of the likely content and conclusions of the interim report. This is 2 days before it was published, and you're now working out the next steps.
I think that's right, yes.
The working party firstly explores the Second Sight 8 themes for improvement. Can we get less than 8? And agrees how they can be implemented. Secondly, looks at the remaining past cases with the Jfsa and MPs if they wish, to see if further themes or new evidence emerge. And then this. Thirdly, our external lawyers review all prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months since the Post Office has been independent of Royal Mail in the light of the Second Sight findings. The Jfsa Post Office Working Group reviews the findings, and then in square brackets, why would they not review all cases of false accounting, e.g. over the last 5 to 10 years, especially where amounts have been small? I assume large amounts would be less likely to get away with saying they were muddle-headed and not helped. But could we review all? It's the false accounting charge that James Arbuthnot was most concerned about. And then if we scroll on, please, over the page. I'm going to skip over 2 and 3 for the moment and look at 4. Issuing a statement that although the system has been proved to have no systemic issues, and our training support processes and helplines have worked for most of the 50 to 60,000 colleagues over the past decade, we're nonetheless genuinely sorry that some of our sub-postmasters who were struggling did not feel we offered them sufficient help and support when they needed it. We're grateful to the JFSA and James Arbuthnot for highlighting the issues. Many are historic and already improved, but we're always open to new ways to improve how we do business to ensure the post office stays as trusted and effective in its communities as it ever was. So going back, and sorry, you say, can we draft this into something I could send to Alan Bates? Yes?
Yes, yes.
Last paragraph. Susan, would we ever ask the lawyers to consider reviewing past prosecutions? Is that what we're talking about in one above, but simply not using the terms? If not, why would it be different? Of our 500 prosecutions, how many are for false accounting? For clarity, these are open questions, just want to know the answers, not an indication that I want us to do so. So just going back to at the first page, please, at the foot. The point 3, our lawyers, external lawyers, reviewing all prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months. And then you ask the question, why would the external lawyers not review all cases of false accounting over the last 5 to 10 years? Why was the proposed review to be limited to prosecutions in the last 12 to 18 months?
I don't remember, and if I might just add, in case there's any confusion, the description muddle-headed was one that Mr. Bates had used. That wasn't a word, and I had picked that up. But in terms of answering your question specifically, I can't recall why 12 to 18 months. There was a question raised by the board at some stage as to...
These are your proposals, though?
No, I think this is... I believe this is me pulling together a number of suggestions that had come in over a period of time from different colleagues.
And you have drawn them together.
I've tried
and
to...
said, we've got the following, which is a variant. And you said, can this be drawn up into a document that can be sent to Alan Bates?
Yes, and what I'm doing here, I think, is showing with colleagues, have I, the way that I worked and they worked in an iterative process, is have I understood what, does this seem a sensible way forwards?
And so you were going to propose that the lawyers review all prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months?
No, I wasn't proposing that. I had been given that information, I think, by somebody else.
Okay, who had given you the information?
It could only have been Susan.
Why were they proposing the past 12 to 18 months?
That I'm not sure. And what I was just trying to say is that the board had asked at some stage, but I'm not sure if it was at this point, whether the company, and this is also a nice Perkins statement, had conducted any prosecutions which had relied solely on Horizon, because there was a concern, clearly, because of the issues that were being raised by Lord Arbuthnot, that the board didn't want to be taking prosecutions until the various investigations had been seen through. But I don't know whether that was anything to do with this particular point. The person, if I have collated this from information from colleagues, that could only have come from Susan, I think.
You drew this up as a collection of what had been said to you,
yes,
or passed to you, and you were happy to put it forward as a proposal subject to the questions that you asked.
Yes, I think we were trying to find a way through post the interim report. The interim report was about to be published, and we still had numbers of cases that needed to be reviewed, and we were trying to find... and what actually happens is, this is moved on a couple more stages, was a solution that would get us through the other cases that would work for the JFSA.
So what was the logic of the proposal to review prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months?
I'm afraid I can't remember, and I can see that I'm asking, in a sense, I don't put it that clearly, but I'm saying, why would they not review all the cases?
It says review all prosecutions in the past 12 to 18 months since the Post Office has been independent of Royal Mail. Was that seen in your discussions with the people involved as the important point of distinction? Will only go back to the point of separation, i.e. April 2012?
No, I think that is my point about the question that was raised in the board, because the board had only been in place since the Post Office had been independent of Royal Mail.
You ask in brackets, why would they, the external lawyers, not review all cases, e.g. over the last 5 to 10 years? Why were you asking that?
I assume because that seemed a fairly sensible question, which is why would we be restricting ourselves to a particular time period?
That's logical, isn't it?
If we're trying to do this properly, why wouldn't we do all of them? Yes.
If we're doing this properly and fairly, why wouldn't we look back at all cases of false accounting?
Yes.
Was that done?
The scheme, no, in terms of what we know today, clearly not. The scheme was opened to 150 cases that came forwards, and the Post Office advertised across the network for any postmasters who wanted to come into the scheme and have their cases reviewed. So my understanding at the time is that we were open to however many postmasters came forwards. But in terms of specifically the Post Office legal team and its lawyers, going back and looking at all the cases, that wasn't the work that was in place.
Why wasn't it put in place? Here you're suggesting that the Post Office itself, through external lawyers, proactively review all cases of false accounting going back up to a decade.
Yes.
And you've, I think, accepted that that would be the fair and proper thing to do. Why didn't the proper and fair thing to do get done?
I can't remember whether you have any further documentation that would see what answer I got to that.
We're going to come to the answers,
yes,
the narrow answers, and essentially we're going to find out that Mark Davis, the PR guy, said it's very dangerous.
I don't remember that. I was asking the question to do this work the right way, and my understanding and acceptance of what was proposed, which was accepted by the MPs and everybody else involved, was that the mediation scheme was the right way through. I think we see other documentation that sees cases go to the CCRC. There is documentation that says cases can't be resolved through mediation in the scheme and they would need to go through the Court of Appeal. The fact I can recall those, I suspect there was a wider discussion around this at some stage.
Do you agree that your nascent idea here of a review of all prosecutions of false accounting, if it had been carried into effect, that may have avoided a lost decade until miscarriages of justice were discovered?
It may well have done. It may well have done.
Do you think the failure to carry into effect the idea that you posit here was a missed opportunity?
At the time, I and the board and everybody else involved in what succeeded after this particular point, what took place after this particular point, felt that that was completely the right way to do this. We were concentrating on individual cases.
You say that such a review, especially where cases have been small, because large amounts would be less likely to get away with saying they were muddle-headed. What do you mean by that?
I'm not entirely sure now. You can see from the way these questions are asked that I'm operating in an area of business, the legal sphere, that I, at the time especially, was very naive about and didn't understand. So I am asking questions because one of the roles of a chief executive is to not sit on questions, is to not stay quiet on things that you don't understand. Sometimes you ask questions and they sound stupid, but it's the right thing to do because you need to ask those questions. And I'm not entirely sure here whether I was assuming that large amounts of false accounting might point more to crime than not. I don't know.
Can you help us as to why you would come up with that idea? A person accused of false accounting in relation to a small amount of money may be more likely to deserve or need a review of their conviction versus a person accused of false accounting a large amount of money.
I don't think that's what I'm saying. I think what I'm saying is that so first of all, I'm asking questions and I don't understand this. I think what I was asking is that if somebody had committed false accounting over a long period of time and had therefore reached a large sum, and I realise today, and I regret what I've said, that I understand very much today why sub-postmasters were driven to do this, but at the time, my naive assumption was that if somebody was false accounting on a regular basis over a long period of time and accumulated a large amount false accounted, that might give an intention of something that was perhaps more planned than where an amount might have been an occasional example.
Okay, can we look at Mr. Davis's reply? Poll 30099055. Foot of the page. Hi, Paula, could we have a word at some point today to discuss this, and specifically how far we go in terms of the wording below? I'm sending this just to you at this stage. I'm very concerned that we may get to a position where we go so far in our commitments that we actually fuel the story and turn it into something bigger than it is. I'm not at all complacent about the issues, but there is a real danger in going too far in commitments about past cases. This is for two reasons. First, the substance of the report doesn't justify this response. Indeed, the response is at such a level that our current media strategy would mean there would be some coverage, but not very much. If we say publicly that we'll look at past cases, whether from recent history or going further back, we will open this up very significantly into front page news. In media terms, it becomes mainstream, very high profile. It would also give James Arbuthnot a very strong case for asking for a parliamentary statement from Biz. My second concern is the impact this would have more broadly. It would have the ballistic impact which AB fears. It would lead to a very public narrative about the very nature of the business, raising questions about Horizon. The reality of what Second Sight has found would be misunderstood, and having an impact on public views about the post office and really widening the issue to the whole network. Do you agree that Mr. Davis is here giving you personal advice on the extent to which past convictions are reviewed on the basis of the extent of the media coverage that each decision might generate?
My understanding at the time was that he, and I think the Post Office generally, and we've seen similar comments from the chairman as well, believed we were dealing with a small number of cases, and the numbers that were coming forward seemed to, at that stage, clearly more came later, seemed to indicate that was the case. And the inquiry heard from Mark Davis last week, I think, where he explained, and that was my understanding at the time, that what he was trying to do was to minimise misinterpretation. It was wrong, because clearly if all past cases needed investigating, they needed investigating. But at the time, that wasn't what the Post Office thought. And I think what he was trying to do here was to, as I say, to minimise misinterpretation and exaggeration in the media.
Do you agree that his first point says you should make a decision about the extent to which you review possible past miscarriages of justice by reference to the extent of media coverage that it will generate?
It does say, it could be read that way. That wasn't my...
Is there another way of reading it?
That I wouldn't have...
And if there is, please explain which words help to read it in a different way. He's saying don't go back 10 years or say that you'll go back 10 years. Our current approach would mean there's going to be some coverage, but not very much, the usual suspects. If we say we'll look back at past cases, we'll be on the front page. Isn't he directly saying?
Yes, I can see that that's what he's saying, but my mindset at the time when I received this is that we were working on specific cases that were coming forwards, and we opened up...
No, hold on, Ms. Vennells. The email that you had sent, to which this is a response, posits, should we look back 12 to 18 months since separation?
Yes.
Or should we go back further? Why aren't we going back
Yeah.
further, 5 to 10 years? And this says, you can't do that. You'll be on the front page. That's a grossly improper perspective, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Do you know why he cut everyone else out of the chain and replied directly to you?
No, I don't.
Was he a very trusted advisor?
He was trusted by all of the team. As I said yesterday, I trusted all of the team, none of them more than the others.
Did you remain in contact with Mr. Davis after you left Post Office?
I did.
Did you exchange messages with him about media statements that you might make and the media lines that you might take in the announcement of this inquiry, for example?
I believe the inquiry has texts that show that.
Even though you'd moved on, he was still advising you into 2020 as the lines to take in your media statements?
I had kept in touch with Mr. Davis for reasons that were very personal to him, and I think he offered that advice at the time.
To what extent did what Mr. Davis advised here affect your decision-making?
I would never, it was simply not the way I worked, have taken a decision based on the advice of one colleague. Never. My way of working was to take as many different views as I possibly could and to involve those individuals in the decision-making as much as I possibly could.
Can we look at the top of page 1, please? your reply. Mark, thanks for this. I don't think we're too far apart. I didn't say this approach would be our media statement, but they'd need to be aligned. You're right to call this out. I will take your steer. You did take the advice of the PR guy, didn't you?
I really don't remember it relating to the decision.
Hang on now, please. Thank you.
As I tried to say before, what we were working to at this stage was numbers of cases going through a scheme, and a scheme that was going to be opened up to anybody who wanted to come forwards. I understand how this reads, but I don't recall making any conscious decision not to go back and put in place a review of all past criminal cases. My conviction as we were going forwards in this was that this scheme would enable any case any postmaster that wanted their case to be reviewed, that the scheme would allow for that.
You continue. There are two objectives, the most urgent being to manage the media. The second is to make sure we do address the concerns of James Arbuthnot and Alan Bates, mainly looking forwards. But we should be aware of Alan Bates' driver is really justice for the past. Otherwise, they will call for reopening cases.
Yes.
It may be that we get to manage Alan Bates and James Arbuthnot by playing on the go ballistic view, i.e. I'll meet him privately to hear his views about these cases, but we cannot refer to anything in relation to past convictions. Any challenge must go via normal legal routes. Is that the way your mind worked at this time? The priority was to manage the media and then deal with the actual substance of issues?
The media issue related to, I believe, because we were right on the day or the day before the release of the Second Sight Interim report. And that's my recollection, that is the media conversation that we were having.
But what we're talking about here is how far back a review of possible miscarriages of justice should go.
Yes, and I'm not closing that down at all.
You say there are two objectives, the most urgent being to manage the media.
I'm pretty sure that was in relation to the interim report, which was due out any time, which, as the inquiry has seen and heard from other people, there were issues in that report which the Post Office disagreed with and the team felt Second Sight hadn't taken account of. That, I think, was the issue that we were talking. So this was a really urgent today or tomorrow issue. And then there was the concerns looking forwards.
No, what you're saying here is you're right, Mark. We will put the past behind us. We won't look at past cases. We'll focus on the future.
That isn't what happened. That simply isn't the case, because the scheme was open to past cases. There was no time limit.
The burden was put on the sub-postmaster to prove their case, wasn't it?
The scheme was open to any postmaster who wanted to bring their case forwards. It was advertised in various ways to encourage people to come forwards. There were other conversations going on at the same time as this exchange with colleagues, and it was very clear that any cases that included criminal convictions would need to go through the Court of Appeal and the normal legal routes. I don't think I understood any more about the legal side of things to to have got involved in anything more complex than that. I believed very sincerely that the scheme we were putting in place would help.
Do you accept that this exchange of emails shows that in making decisions as to the substance as to what the post office should do, i.e. whether it itself should seek to review whether there had been past miscarriages of justice, you took into account the views of your media advisor as to the extent to which your decision would meet with front page news?
I do not recall that being... I see what is written here. There were other conversations going on at the same time. The highlighted paragraph isn't as clear as what you're saying. I do not think, and I would not have taken, personally, any decision on review of historic cases. That was not my role. I wasn't qualified or competent to do that. I did not take that decision. What I was trying to do at this stage was to find a way forwards through the cases that had come into the post office, and to encourage more to come forwards, which would have enabled any case to go through normal legal routes if the post office couldn't help it. No, I absolutely don't accept that I took a decision to not review past criminal cases based on a media outcome. I didn't take any decision on that. I wouldn't have been able to do so. And it would have been such an important decision that would have had to have gone to the board.
Can I just ask, and this may be entirely my fault, so I preface it by that, but I'm not clear that as of the 6th of July or the 7th of July or this period of time, this discussion of how to approach the issue of past cases is taking place in the context of Second Sight continuing its investigative work beyond the interim report, or in the context of the idea of a mediation scheme. Do you understand the distinction I'm trying to draw?
Not entirely. Would you?
Well, as I see it in simple terms, Second Sight began by investigating in the context of a number of cases.
Yes.
And after their interim report, somehow a transition took place so that what I'll call a mediation scheme emerged. And I'm not sure, as of this date, i.e. at or about the time when Second Sight was to produce its interim report, whether the discussions of how to deal with past cases was in the context simply of Second Sight moving forward with their investigations, or by that stage, in the post office's mind, that was at an end and something new was emerging.
No, I think that's a helpful question. I think there was a process of evolution. So
Sure, but I wanted to try and
yes, and
pinpoint.
I'm trying to think through what Second Sight had done the work it had done up to the publication of the interim report. There was still a number of cases that hadn't been looked at, which needed to be continued. I had been disappointed about the way the post office team hadn't worked as well or been able to contribute to the work Second Sight had done. And I say that I would like us to work collaboratively with the Jfsa, who still had a very serious vested interest in that. And a proposal was made to form a working party, I think was the word that was used. And that was, I recollect, an attempt to work together to go through the remaining cases. At some stage, and as we were going through this, because it was an iterative process, people were contributing ideas as to how this might play out. I had a conversation with Susan, and this I remember very clearly because I can remember where it was. I'd arrived home at this, and I was standing on the station, and she called me, and Susan suggested that a way of bringing trouble is I now know what didn't happen, but some of these cases, or these cases to a conclusion, would be to introduce mediation. What she said was that, and again, this is in documentation somewhere, is that mediation, that sometimes what was needed in cases is for people to hear the post office apologise and say that it was sorry that it got things wrong, or for the post office to explain to a sub-postmaster that perhaps they had done something wrong, and that once the cases had been reviewed through this working party process, that might then be a way to reach some finality on those cases. What was also talked about at the same time was that if this was a good thing to do, which clearly it was, the post office then needed an ongoing process, possibly an adjudication process, an external ombudsman, on a permanent basis, so that if this type of challenge arose again, there was an external appeal process, if you like, for sub-postmasters to go to. And the thing that I'm missing, Sir Wynne, in telling you all of that is if Susan knew, which of course she did, and I wouldn't have known so well, that criminal cases couldn't be resolved through mediation, and this is simply a question, did she know that there would need to have been a further review, or was her understanding at that time, which is a fact that was later described, that any criminal cases going through the mediation scheme would be open to all of the investigation work that was done by Post Office and Second Sight and Fujitsu, which may then give them information to take forward through the normal legal routes, through the Court of Appeal or the CCRC.
Ms. Vennells, can we look at page 2 of this document and scroll down? This is your thoughts on the proposal as at the 6th of July.
Yeah.
In direct answer to the chairman's question, isn't it the case that Second Sight were to play no part going forwards?
There were conversations about whether Second Sight should or shouldn't, because there were concerns about the fact that this had run on too long and was way over budget, and there were, and this again is in many documents, there were concerns that their work was not at this stage sufficiently evidence-based.
Your proposal didn't involve any role for Second Sight, did it?
I'm not sure that's
Look at the
true.
email
It
on
was
the
a
screen.
consideration. Sorry?
Look at the email on the screen. Your written proposal did not contain any role for Second Sight, did it?
It doesn't at this stage, because we're in this process of evolution, say that Second Sight...
This process of evolution, it doesn't involve any role for Second Sight.
I'm not sure, because it doesn't say that they would or they wouldn't. What it says is that it would explore their themes for improvement. And I'm being frank with you that there were conversations about whether that there was criticism of the work that Second Sight had done, but there was equal understanding that they had the support of MPs, notably James Arbuthnot, and that we had committed to do that work. But
Back to page 1, please. You say you're right to call this out. I'll take your steer, no issue. Do you agree that this email chain reads as if the PR man has influenced you conclusively as to a decision as to whether or not the Post Office would itself review whether and to what extent there had been past miscarriages of justice?
I wouldn't take that steer on a legal matter from Mark Davis. He clearly... He was talking about, and again, in the timescales we're talking about publicity within the next couple of days as a report coming out. But I wouldn't have taken a decision on anything at all to do with legal matters from Mark Davis.
Okay, let's
And-
see what the... I'm so sorry, I spoke over you.
Sorry, it's fine.
Let's see what the IT person was telling you on what to do about looking at possible miscarriages of justice. At poll 3009-9056, this is a separate chain, remembering that Mark Davis had just replied to you. This is Leslie Sewell's reply to your email setting out your proposals. She does include everyone on the chain and doesn't cut people out.
Mm-hmm.
Paula, just a couple of thoughts. If we state we will review the cases in separation, that implies that there are material findings in the second site review and leaves us open to challenge against all cases. It may be better to offer in the spirit of the review and how we have listened to those affected and how we want to change our business. This is the delicate line we are balancing. And from memory, Susan quoted more than 500 cases in the last 10 years. It may be an option to allow sub-postmasters to come forward and request a review. I agree on the points about the working group and user group, etc. Did you bring into account in your decision-making the views that the head of IT was giving you on the extent to which the post office should itself ask independent lawyers to review past convictions?
I would have read Leslie Sewell's email sent to me. I wouldn't take any decision on legal matters personally without the advice of the General Counsel and on something this significant as the board.
We can see that you've had what the PR expert has been telling you to do about past convictions, and hear the head of IT telling you. I think your position is that you did not see Simon Clarke's advices which address looking at past convictions until after the Court of Appeal Criminal Division disclosures in late 2020, early 2021.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So you didn't know that there were lawyers advising on the very issues that you were considering at this time, bringing into account the PR man and the IT lady's views?
I had no sight of the Simon Clarke advices, no.
You tell us in your witness statement, that can come down, thank you, it's paragraph 562, no need to turn it up, that you recall that you were told by Susan Crichton that due to advice from external lawyers, there was a need for a review to ensure that proper disclosure had been given in previous criminal cases.
Yes.
You say that you had a conversation with Leslie Sewell in which she told you that the post office had been advised that the expert witness that the post office had used in criminal cases to give evidence about Horizon had failed to mention there were bugs in Horizon, including in the Seema Misra case. You tell us that in your witness statement.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Can we please try to pin down the date on which you had knowledge of a problem with the post office's expert evidence?
It's difficult to find the date exactly. I remember that I learned of it first from Leslie Sewell, not from Susan Crichton. What had happened is I passed Leslie in the corridor. She was looking particularly concerned or grumpy about something, and I asked her what was the matter. And she said that she had just heard that, so I don't know that she said this, but I'm assuming from Susan, that the post office expert from Fujitsu, whom we had used in past cases, now had to be stood down because he had not revealed, and as I said yesterday, I think 1 or 2 bugs that he knew about in a case. And that's right, I think it was Mrs. Misra's. And the reason that Leslie explained he hadn't revealed those bugs in that case is that they hadn't been, Mrs. Misra's was a Horizon Online case, and these, the other way around, Mrs. Misra's case was on Legacy Horizon, and these bugs hadn't come into effect until Horizon Online.
Ms. Vennells, the way you've described it there is that Ms. Sewell was telling you that the expert had failed to mention bugs in one case, and that was Seema Misra. In your witness statement, you say that she told you that he had failed to give disclosure in criminal cases, including Seema Misra.
Right, that's probably right then.
Again, can you help us as to the time of this, please?
Well, I then spoke to Susan, I think within a day or so of that conversation. Susan explained more about it. So if you can date when Susan found out, it would have been just before that, because Leslie could only have found out from Susan.
By this time, and I'll call it mid-2013, you had been engaged on the issues of Horizon integrity for some time, hadn't you?
From when, yes.
You knew that there had been prosecutions, and that those prosecutions had been founded on evidence from Horizon.
Yes.
When told by Leslie Sewell and then Susan Crichton that there was an issue with the Post Office's expert evidence that had been relied on to convict sub-postmasters, including Mrs. Misra, were you concerned?
Yes, and I think Susan had, and I think the documentation says this, Susan had told, at the time I spoke to Susan about it, she said, I think, that she had already put in chain a review by the external lawyers. And I think the documentation shows that she had done that before the written advice from Simon Clarke came in on the 15th.
Did you at the time join the dots between the debates that we've seen you have in emails here with Mr. Davis and Miss Sewell about the extent to which the Post Office should announce that it was going to review past convictions, and the information that you were being given, quite separately, that the Post Office's expert witness had failed to mention bugs of which he had knowledge in criminal cases?
No, I didn't make that link.
Why not?
I think because the emails from Mark Davis and Leslie Sewell are part of an iterative process as to how we took this important ongoing piece of work forwards. The conversation with Susan Crichton about the work that became known as the Cartwright King SIFT review was, I think I took as a piece of reassurance that the lawyers were doing what they needed to do in terms of and I think this is at the stage where I learnt about disclosure, of what they needed to do in respect to disclosure. What I didn't know at this stage, to be very clear, was that by dint of what had happened with Gareth Jenkins, the Post Office had breached its duties as a prosecutor. I don't think that was mentioned to me at the time.
Did you never at any time connect the long-running criticism of Horizon's integrity that had been forced upon the Post Office by sub-postmasters for years and years with being informed that there was a problem with the expert evidence on which the Post Office had relied about bugs?
I don't think I made that connection because it was very specific. The information I was told was very specific, which was that these 2 bugs were related to Horizon Online. There were 2 of them which affected, and by this stage I knew about them, which affected 14 and 62 post offices, I think, all of whom had been informed, or in the case of the 14 were in the process of being informed, and the bugs had been fixed and the postmasters had not lost any money as a result of that. So this was Leslie's frustration, which was that these were 2 isolated incidents. I accept now that is incorrect, but that was what I was told. They had been fixed. There is even documentation which refers to them as a red herring, and the fact that Susan was going through this SIFT review, to me, seemed to be reassuring rather than concerning.
Did you ask who this witness was?
I don't believe I knew Mr. Jenkins' name because there is...
I'm asking, did you ask who was this witness?
I think I was told that it was a Fujitsu, someone who worked for Fujitsu who was very competent on the system.
Did you ask how many cases he had given evidence in?
No.
Did you ask what was being done in relation to the evidence that the Post Office was concerned about?
I'm sorry, ask the question
Yes.
again?
Did you ask what the Post Office was doing as a result of its concern that he had failed to mention in cases knowledge of bugs?
I was told that we were going back looking at, or that Cartwright King were going back looking at cases. So
Why were they doing that if it was a red herring?
I understood, because that was the obligation that one had to do, was that any case that he had given evidence in needed to be given this evidence around these 2 bugs, even if it didn't affect those cases.
Were you told that he was an unsafe witness?
No.
Can we jump forwards, please, to October of this year, October 2013, and look at poll 0038-2001. At the foot of page 1, please. An email from you to Alice Perkins, signing out. Hi Alice, don't worry about the lateness of the note. I'm clearing the tray before I'm signing out. A couple of updates. Sir Anthony Hooper, Sparrow, very positive phone call on Friday PM. No issue at all, re Hillsborough. He's going to send a file note. And then my concern, re Sparrow, is currently our obligations of disclosure, re an unsafe witness. The representative from Fujitsu made statements about no bugs, which later could be seen to have been undermined by the second site report. We don't think it is material, but it could be high profile. Is the unsafe witness that you're referring to there the same person that Leslie Sewell and Susan Crichton had referred to earlier?
Yes. Yeah.
Had they described him as an unsafe witness?
I don't know where. I only saw this disclosure recently, so I haven't had a chance to go back and see whether an unsafe witness is not a term that I would have used. So, and the other thing...
You did use it?
Yeah, sorry. the adjective unsafe is not something, in relation to the word witness, it's quite a specific description. And I'm not sure that that's something that I would have just used coincidentally. And when I looked at this email, this is some considerable time. So this is 3 months after I found out about Mr. Jenkins being stood down. So I don't know whether at this stage I had been given more information about him or not.
It's 6 days after. It's 6 days after Mr. Altman did his general review, a
Right.
document which I think you say you weren't told about
No.
and didn't see.
No. Does he use the term?
Not precisely, but in any event, you understood that there was an issue by the date of this email concerning
Yes.
disclosure that related to an unsafe witness, correct?
Yes.
And that related to him making statements about there not being bugs in Horizon.
That was my understanding.
So you understood by this time that there was an issue about the reliability of the Fujitsu expert evidence about there being bugs, i.e. the absence of them,
Yes.
and not merely about the presence of bugs that had been revealed by the second site report.
That's what it says here.
Yes.
Yes.
And you say, we do not think it is material, or it material, but could be high profile. If the issue of the expert evidence in criminal cases was not material, why would it be high profile?
I suspect this is the media aspect again, which is the worry that something that could be taken out of context. I'm not entirely sure, because whether I was given this information very quickly, because I'm clearly going somewhere, and Martin Edwards is briefed to give Alice more detail. I just have no recall of this at all.
Who's the we in that sentence?
I can only imagine that this has come from, well, it wouldn't, yes, possibly Susan Crichton, the legal team.
Where is it recorded that what it was alleged that Mr. Jenkins had failed to do or had done was not material?
I don't know. I would not have personally been able to make that statement without getting it from someone who knew. I didn't understand about, as I now do, about the nature of an expert witness.
There existed at this time the Simon Clarke advice of the
Yes.
15th of July 2013, which addressed page upon page this very issue, the materiality.
I'm sorry, I think I've just remembered. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you.
You go ahead.
I think Cartwright King had said that, because they had obviously by this stage done a number of checks across sub-postmaster cases, and I think they had said that the disclosures were a fairly small number, and that may be what this is relating to.
So material means not many.
It could be that, yes.
As I was saying, there existed at this time the Simon Clarke review of the 15th of July 2013 on this very issue, the materiality of what Gareth Jenkins had said in witness statements and to a court in oral evidence. But you hadn't been given it. the
No.
advice.
No.
Did you even know that external lawyers had been instructed to advise on the very issue that you're debating?
Do you mean in the sense of the Cartwright-King review?
No, the materiality of what Mr. Jenkins had said or had failed to say.
I don't think so.
Do you know where you got the idea that we do not think it, i.e. The expert witness making statements about there being no bugs in Horizon from?
I'm sure there is something in the documentation about numbers of cases. I was not personally involved in any of this at all. I mean, I wasn't working with the external lawyers doing the review, so I couldn't have known what they did or didn't think. And therefore, it can only have come through the legal team. Or possibly Martin. I mean, it is possible that Martin was briefed by, but again, he would have had it through the legal team.
Isn't the material comment here another reference back to the supposed red herring, rather than about numbers?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, only in the context that... No, I don't, that isn't what I understood. And there is certainly something in documentation somewhere that makes the statement that the lawyers, Cartwright-King, did not think that there would be a large number of cases where the disclosure needed to be made.
Can we go back then to mid-July 2013, but probably after the break? So can we say past, please?
Yep, certainly.
Thank you, Ms. Vennells. Can we pick up in mid-July 2013, please, by looking at poll 0010-0702? This is a letter from the CCRC directly to you of the 12th of July 2013. If we just look at it, Horizon Computer System, the CCRC is an independent body. Our purpose is to review possible miscarriages of justice in the criminal courts of England, Wales and Northern Ireland and refer appropriate cases to the appeal court. For obvious reasons, we've read the recent media coverage concerning the Post Office Horizon Computer System with interest. Clearly, it would be very useful for us to have more information directly from the Post Office, especially accurate information as to the number of criminal convictions that might be impacted by the issue and what action is proposed or being taken in that respect. We see that the AG was called upon on Tuesday to set up an inquiry. We're in contact with his office about that. In essence, the Commission's role in this is likely to relate to anyone who is convicted of a criminal offence in England, Wales or Northern Ireland, where evidence from the Horizon Computer System is relevant, where one, they've already tried to appeal against that conviction, or two, they were convicted at a magistrate's court following a guilty plea. I look forward to receiving your reply. This must have been a very unwelcome development.
I remember receiving the letter from the CCRC. I don't remember personally regarding it as unwelcome.
It arrived at a time at which you would have been told, is this right, by Susan Crichton about the need to review past convictions.
I would think so, yes.
And it would have arrived at a time when you'd been told by Susan Crichton and Leslie Sewell about the concern about the Fujitsu expert witnesses' evidence to the courts, including in the Seema Misra case?
Yes.
A letter like this does not land on the doorstep of the CEO every day of the week, does it?
No.
Would you agree that the right and honest thing to do would have been to let the CCRC know about the Post Office's concerns over Gareth Jenkins?
What I did with this letter was to ask Susan to reply as the legal expert in the organisation. I don't believe that I would have given her direction as to how we should reply to it.
The right and honest
and
thing...
for clarity, I wouldn't have either instructed her to leave things out.
The right and honest thing for the Post Office to have done would be to have let the CCRC know, and know promptly, over its concerns about the truthfulness and reliability of the evidence that Gareth Jenkins had given to court, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
That didn't happen for years and years, did it?
I understand that to be the case now, yeah.
Given what was on your mind, what you'd said to Alice Perkins a couple of days before this in the email that we saw, did you think we need to say to the CCRC what we know about Gareth Jenkins?
I don't think we're looking at the same timescale. The email that I sent to Alice Perkins was in October. This is July.
I'm talking about the, the exchange with Leslie Sewell and Mark Davis. My mistake.
I'm sorry, so what was the question?
Yes, in the light of the exchanges
Yes.
that you had with Mark Davis and Leslie Sewell about the extent to which we have to go back and look at past previous convictions, up to 500 of them, for false accounting. Do you think and the conversations that you'd had with Leslie Sewell and Susan Crichton about the person you now know to be Gareth Jenkins, do you think the right thing to have said in response to the CCRC was, we have got concerns about a key witness in a number of our cases?
Yes, yes, I sound slightly hesitant because I wouldn't have known what let me step back. My understanding and expectation is that when the Post Office receives something like this from the CCRC, that it should respond in the fullest way possible, to be transparent about whatever it was that needed to be shared with the CCRC.
Can we turn forwards, please, to poll 00, in fact, it's a couple of days before this, poll 0040 7582. This is an attendance note of the 10th of July. You're not present. It seems to be between Susan Crichton, Hugh Flemington, and Simon Richardson. Can you recall who Simon Richardson was?
Yes, he was one of the partners from Bond Dickinson who had worked on Post Office work for quite some time.
And then if we scroll down, please, to 6. Thank you. I should just read the introduction to this. There was then something of a general discussion around how they were going to manage the additional complaints and resourcing. Essentially where we got to was quite a lengthy brainstorming session. And then 6, the real worry was around the Fujitsu expert who appeared to have known of some of the problems but not referred to them in his report or statement, even though they could be dismissed. There are non-disclosure issues here. They're looking at replacing that expert with somebody else. And then 7, there was generally an overall defensive air, and the board are also feeling bruised. Stopping there, by this time, was it the case that the board was feeling bruised? This is 10th of July.
These are Simon's words. I certainly don't recall. Well, he's reflecting a conversation he's had with 2 colleagues at the post office.
Yes.
It's not an adjective I'd have used in respect to the board. The board were feeling very frustrated. I don't
Frustrated
think they felt
about
bruised.
what?
That the second site interim report had not, according to colleagues, had not taken account of the post office's factual evidence against issues that were raised and criticisms made of the post office. And secondly, that it had taken too long and was continuing to run up budgets that to levels that had not been expected.
Do you think that's what this might be a reference to? They're feeling bruised.
I can't think what else it would be a reference to. The board were very frustrated by the criticisms in the second site interim report, which at that stage they were told were, at least in some cases, according to the team, unfounded, because second site hadn't had sufficient time in preparing it to take on board the post office's evidence.
The note continues seemingly on the basis of what your 2 colleagues, Susan Crichton and Hugh Flemington, said. There are tensions between people, and that includes Alice Perkins, the chair, Paula Vennells, and Susan Crichton. At this time, were there tensions between Alice Perkins, you, and Susan Crichton?
There had been some difficult conversations. I can't remember exactly. Alice, well, we were all frustrated by the report. Alice felt frustrated by it. She could not understand, and again, there's documentation on this as to why we had ended up in why the business, as she put it, had ended up in the position that it had, with a report that hadn't taken account of post office's input and conclusions seemingly reached or suggested. To be fair to second site, they'd said it was an interim report. I had been challenged over that, and there was going to be more challenge to come a couple of days after this in a board meeting. And I don't know what, at this stage, I don't know what conversations had taken place between Alice and Susan. Certainly Susan and I had discussed about how we were going to... We'd had conversations about the first draft of a second site report, which I think she went back to talk to them about, and some changes were made, but nothing substantive. And it was a difficult time.
Were there tensions between you and Alice Perkins?
I don't recall that she had been critical. I mean, Alice was a very straightforward chair, and I generally took feedback pretty well. And again, forgive me for repeating the phrase, but there is documentation on that as well. I'm sure she gave me some fairly straightforward feedback about why this had taken so long, why it was over budget, why the report contained things that the post office felt were inaccurate.
The minute continues, I said, that Simon Richardson, that I thought the minister had dealt with the questions extremely well and looked in control of the brief. Evidently, she had the post office in to tear them off a strip for not putting someone up earlier in the day for interviews on radio and TV. I said, my view, it was a good thing that no one was there. It was a no-win given the nature of the complaints, and some are sub-postmasters who were generally reporting rather wild stories of what had gone on. However, I understood the political imperative of somebody being put up. Susan Crichton said she would pass my comments on to the comms director. However, I told them that my view was they need to be much more on the offensive about this. This was a new management team who put in place a new independent report and were dealing with the problems. The chair, that's Alice Perkins, seems to have been taken by surprise by the reaction and the noise generated. Paula Vennells may be sensitive around some of these issues happening on her watch as the network director. I said I still thought there were positive messages to deliver and people just need to get into a different mindset. She said that Paula Vennells had asked about what I knew and she might pass on my comments to her. I said I was happy to talk to Paula Vennells since we knew each other from another difficult project in the days when they were a subsidiary of the Royal Mail Group, etc. In your approach to the reaction to the second site report, were you sensitive that some of the issues it addressed happened on your watch as network director?
No, I wasn't.
The note says that the real issue here, the real worry, was around the Fujitsu expert who appeared to have known some of the problems and not refer to them in his report or statement. There are non-disclosure issues here. Was the result of this meeting fed back to you?
I don't believe so.
Would you be surprised that members of your team were having this in-depth and frank conversation about Gareth Jenkins being the real worry that was facing the post office after the interim report, and yet this information not being fed back to you, nor indeed to the board?
Yes, I would be surprised at that.
How's it come about that they're having this very frank conversation with somebody with whom you have a history, as is referred to here, Simon Richardson, and you never get to know about it?
Oh, my history with Simon Richardson was one case that we sat on at Royal Mail Group where we were on an appeal panel and working with him a long time ago on post office closures, but I hardly met with Simon.
It's recorded here that she said that Paula Vennells had asked about what that Simon Richardson, knew. Do you know what that's a reference to?
I don't. If you'd like to take me back up the email in case there's something there that prompts
It's an attendance note, but yes, let's go back up.
It may simply be that I was asking for what Simon's view was on the work that was underway, because he was the partner for the post office, or had been a partner for the post office.
Again, asking the general question, how is it that two relatively senior members of your team, Susan Crichton, the General Counsel no less, were having this frank conversation with a solicitor, and the outcome of it never reached you or the board, if your evidence is correct?
To be honest, I don't know whether Susan, as you've heard previously, it was not a process in the post office which was wrong for advisors, if this is considered advice, which in a sense it is, to be fed back. And the reason I was looking down the list of numbered points is in case any of it was fed back and some wasn't.
Is it every day of the week, though, in the post office that it is told that the safety of its convictions, its criminal convictions, may be called into question by unreliable evidence given by an expert
No, Mr.
witness?
Beer, I agree. It should have been shared.
You were explaining perhaps why it wasn't shared because of a convention of not giving council's advice or solicitor's advice documents to the board.
Yes.
That
But it
doesn't
should have
prevent any of the
No.
substance
Yes, I
being
agree.
conveyed, does
Yes.
it?
No.
So what's at work here in your view? Why is this information not coming back up to you? You've got Cartwright King through Simon King advising on the one hand. You've got Bond Dickinson advising here that the real worry is Gareth Jenkins on the other.
My hesitation on this is that I now know much more than now know much more than I did at the time. So I'm now aware that Mr. Jenkins had never been briefed as an expert witness. I don't know whether this is suggesting that that was part of the real worry, or whether the worry that is expressed at point 6 is what the organisation knew already, which was non-disclosure issues, because the Cartwright King review had started by this stage. But I'm afraid I can't help you why more of that wasn't shared.
Thank you. If we move on, the second site interim report was in fact published on the 8th of July. The reference, we needn't show it at the moment, is poll 3029744, and it referred to 3 bugs in Horizon: the receipts and payments mismatch bug, the suspense account bug, and, although it didn't name it, the calendar square or Falkirk bug. If we just look at your witness statement, please, it's paragraph 253F on page 111. Page 111, please. And if we scroll down to F, please. You say, I was not made aware between joining the post office in 2007 and early 2012 that any bugs, errors or defects had been identified in Legacy Horizon or Horizon Online. And then you say the first that I knew that any bugs, errors or defects had been discovered was in mid-2013, when I was made aware for the first time that the bug known as the calendar square problem in Legacy Horizon and 2 bugs in Horizon Online, receipts and payments mismatch and local suspense account problem. Can I ask for your assistance on what your evidence means here? You state in the first sentence that you were not aware until early 2012 that any bugs had been identified in either system. And then in the second sentence, you say the first that I knew that any bugs had been discovered was in mid-2013.
I'm sorry.
They appear contradictory.
Yes, they do. I'm sorry. So sorry.
So what's the correct answer to the question?
correct
When did you first
yes,
know of any bugs, errors or defects?
2013.
So why did you say here that it was early 2012 that you were made aware that bugs, errors and defects had been identified in Horizon?
I don't know, because the only thing I can think as an explanation is that the local suspense bug was, I think, drawn to the post office's attention in 2012, but nobody knew about that because it had been referred to the NBSC, and that I suspect this is just a mistake.
So the correct evidence is that represented in the second sentence?
Yes.
Is that right? And the first is just a mistake?
Yes. Yeah.
Can we turn to what was said in the run-up to the second site report about the post office's position on the 3 bugs?
Mm-hmm.
Can we look, please, at poll 00105632? Can you see this is an email to you and others from Olwyn Lyons, re the James brief? And she says, Paula, the only thing that's not in the brief for James is our move away from, quote, there are no bugs in Horizon, to there are known bugs in every computer system this size, but they're found and put right, and no sub-postmaster is disadvantaged by them. It would be good to be able to go on and say, or has been wrongfully suspended or prosecuted. Did this represent a move, a shift in position, preemptively before the second site report from there are no bugs in Horizon to the then altered position that's set out by Olwyn Lyons?
It was, so firstly, I don't recall, and I think Alwyn said this on Tuesday as well, that there had been a line, as it were, that there were no bugs in Horizon. I don't remember, and I haven't seen it anywhere as being used, but it would be completely right for the post office, if that was a line that it had used, to correct it.
I mean, if that's
it
right,
wouldn't have been done preemptively because of the second site report. It would just have been done because it was the right thing to do.
if that's right, that there hadn't been a position adopted by the post office of there are no bugs in Horizon, this email makes no sense.
No, I agree, and they're written as lines in inverted commas. I can only assume that this came from Mark Davis and the communications team. I don't recall having a conversation about that.
You tell us in your witness statement that it's paragraph 389 on page 183, no need to turn it up, that after the receipts and payments mismatch bug and the local suspense account bug came to light, as you put it, in May 23, we no longer lived in a world where no bugs had been found in the system.
Yes.
That was your position and the post office's position up until at least May 2013, that no bugs had been found in the system, wasn't it?
I think that's right. What I'm trying to say here is that I don't remember seeing it as a line in communications. But as soon as we had discovered these bugs, if we had been saying publicly that there were no bugs, clearly that needed to be corrected.
In any event, in May 2013, you no longer lived in a world where no bugs had been
Yes.
found in the system.
Yes.
In your position as chief executive, was that not very significant information? We've got 3 bugs, or had 3 bugs in the system.
It is significant. At that stage, it doesn't make any difference, but there were only 2 that I knew of. And what was very important to me, and the inquiry can see this from emails that I sent and work that I did, was that, and I can remember saying to Owen Lyons actually that I wanted to demonstrate leadership in this case. This was around the local suspense bug, that it was, that I wanted reassurance that Fujitsu had done as it said, which is that all affected post offices had been identified, that we had looked at whatever the shortfalls were, that post offices had not been held accountable for any of those, or that they were held accountable for any losses, that they were all written to, which they were. And so my priority was to make sure that it was dealt with. In terms of the second bug, the receipts and payments mismatch bug, that I was told had been dealt with, and again it's in documentation that the post offices affected by that had been written to as well.
Ms. Vennells, you tell us time and time again in your witness statement that up until May 2013, you had been told time and time again that there were no bugs in Horizon. You'd been
Yes.
reassured. It was the basis on which you'd operated. Isn't this world-changing information for you? In
Yes.
fact, there were bugs. The previous assurances that I've been given were false.
Yes, it was information that changed. The way that I was told about those 2 bugs was that they were, and I'm not referring to previous exchanges elsewhere, but they were incidents that had been dealt with. They were bugs that had been resolved, and that they were red herrings to the work, and they didn't affect any of the branches that Second Sight were looking at, and the branches that had been affected had been properly supported by the Post Office, and the cases have been dealt with.
What's the answer to my direct question that you had been told repeatedly for 6 years since you joined
Yes.
Post Office that there were no bugs in Horizon? That mantra is key to what you say in your witness statement as to what you did as managing director and previously as network director. It was the consistent message from the business. And then you're told, no, in fact, there are bugs in the system. And you're telling us, but they don't matter, they're just red herring bugs. Did you explore why you had been given false information in the past?
I think, to be really clear on this, because it's important, I was told that what I was told was about Horizon, and I'm not splitting hairs on this. I was told that Horizon, that where cases had gone to court, the courts had found in favour of Horizon, that where issues had been raised, I knew, and I say in my statement, that there were always glitches and issues with the system. I knew that from having visited branches, whether it was the egg timer issue or the blue screens or network failures or whatever.
Let's go back to page 111 of your witness statement. F. You say, I was not made aware between joining the Post Office in 2007 and, you told us this should read mid-2013, that any bugs had been identified in Legacy Horizon or Horizon Online. The first I knew that any bugs had been discovered was mid-2013.
Yes, yes.
So wasn't it world-changing information? That
I'm sorry. I'm not. What I'm not getting across clearly enough is that this was important, but I was reassured at the same time that these bugs had been dealt with.
And is that reassurance anywhere in writing? Or is it one of these corridor conversations?
I think it is in writing. In the Second Sight Interim report, both of them are detailed, and it explains, I think, pretty much what I've said in more detail, but that Post Office is that this I now know was wrong, that the system had identified the issues, that they had been fixed, the Post Office has been informed, and nobody had been held accountable for any losses, and where surpluses were left in the hands of the postmasters.
Given that you'd not been told before mid-2013 about any bugs in the system, and you were operating on the basis that there were none, on being told that in fact the system did have bugs, would you not have wanted a watertight assurance from Fujitsu that there were no more bugs?
I should have asked for that.
Do I take the answer that you've just given to mean, yes, I would have wanted assurance, but I didn't ask?
I had at this roughly about the same time, or maybe a month before, I'd had a conversation with the chief executive of Fujitsu.
Is this the Fort Knox conversation?
Yes, which had been based around the allegations around what Mr. Rudkin had raised.
That's a separate issue.
It is a separate issue, but I'm not a technical expert, and I'm dealing with challenges to the Horizon system, and I'm working within a context where I'm taking numbers of inputs. I took these seriously, and I accepted the explanations that I had been given, and I knew that those explanations had been based on, but again now this sounds very hollow in hindsight, on work that had been done by Fujitsu.
Can we look, please, at poll 3090219? This is the press statement that the Post Office put out on the publication of the interim report. If we scroll out a little bit, please. You'll see in the third paragraph and following, it says, Chief Executive, you said as follows. Yes?
Yes, yeah.
Did you approve this statement?
I would generally. There are occasions when I may not have been able to, but generally I wouldn't usually put my name to something that I hadn't read.
In particular, where direct quotes are attributed to you in quotation marks?
Yes.
We know that the Post Office had been informed of the receipts and payments mismatch bug in September or October 2010. We know that the suspense account bug had been drawn to the Post Office's attention as an operative problem by at least February 2013. And we know that the Calendar Square or Falkirk bug had been drawn to the Post Office's attention in 2006. Do you know why this press statement did not acknowledge that the Post Office had known about each of the 3 bugs referred to in the Second Sight report for many years?
I don't remember having any conversation about that, no.
You will see that it instead concentrates upon the number of people using the system, the number of branches, the number of transactions.
Yes.
Was that the mantra that the Post Office had used for many years to defend allegations against Horizon?
It was a truth, and it was an explanation that was overused, and I fully accept that now.
Thank you. That's a convenient moment before we move to our next topic, sir. Could I say, I think it's 12:05 now, could I say 10 to 2, please?
10 to 2.
Thank you.